Bienvenidos a Single Malt Whisky en español. El día de hoy comenzamos con un pequeño ciclo de entrevistas y conversaciones con grandes conocedores y expertos del mundo del whisky. ¿Qué podemos decir de nuestro invitado de hoy? Una persona especial para mí, de verdad. Es una persona que me introdujo a mí, al mundo del whisky a través de sus libros. Lo estaba comentando con él hace poco que Malt Whisky, que es uno de sus libros, si no me equivoco, lo publicó por primera vez en el año 97. Es uno de los libros más importantes para mí. Fue lo que inició o despertó en mí el interés por el whisky, aunque ya yo había leído libros de otros grandes autores como Michael Jackson y algunos otros. Bueno, nada más y nada menos que Charles MacLean, no sé si lo pueden ver en pantalla, espero que sí, también conocido como Charlie MacLean entre sus amigos, titulado en Artes y Leyes, formado en el análisis sensorial en lo que hoy conocemos como el Scotch Whisky Research Institute, editor fundador de Whisky Magazine, Master of the Quaich, ha dedicado más de 4 décadas a la investigación sobre whisky, ha sido asesor en la industria del whisky por muchos años, ha publicado 18 libros sobre whisky y tengo entendido que viene uno más en camino que ya está escrito, pero falta por publicar. Recibió de la reina un MBE, que es un Member of the Order of the British Empire, o como diríamos nosotros, un miembro de la Orden del Imperio Británico, por sus servicios al whisky y organizaciones de caridad. Sin duda es un gran conocedor, una persona que ha dedicado más de 4 décadas al estudio, a la investigación sobre el whisky. Charles además siempre ha sido una persona quien ha visto sus videos y sus libros, sabe que es una persona que está bien inmersa y además durante muchos años ha entrenado gente en distintas destilerías de la industria. That's an amazing whiskey life, Charles. I know you didn't understand what I said, but you know that's your bio and all your stuff. I hope that the people value what you are and
Well,
thank you for joining us today. It is a special for me. You are a good guy. Everybody says that you're a good guy. You are a true connoisseur in whiskey. So thank you for your time.
well, thank you for your kind words, Daniel. Spanish is such a beautiful language. It's much more attractive than English. I couldn't understand very much, but I know it was very flattering. Thank you
I
very much.
know, I know. Don't worry, don't worry. You will see the subtitles maybe in the future. So don't worry for that. So I want to say, well, again, welcome to Single Malt Whisky en Español. This is our first interview or whiskey talk with a person that is very, very respected as Charlie MacLean is. I have to say, and I told Charlie before that this whiskey book is very special for me. Malt Whisky by Charles MacLean and Wikipedia and all his books sparked the desire to learn more about whiskey and me. So honestly, I'm a little bit nervous because this is special for me. But Charles, I know you are a great guy. I hope you enjoy this evening.
Oh, Daniel, pour yourself a very large dram, and then
I
we'll.
will. I will. I will. I will. I will. I will. I will. Give me a few seconds, please. Sorry, I did it before. Yeah,
And I will refresh my glass as well.
beautiful. Yeah, amazing. Let me see. Mm. Now we're talking. It's lunch, my friend. Cheers to you.
Lunch aboard.
What I want to say now. Well, Charles, I have a few questions with you. You are uh, free to say whatever you want. We didn't stage this thing. I just want to be honest. And well, I know you have responded many of these questions before, but I want the Spanish audience to hear your ideas about the thing. So a few questions for you. Are you ready?
Yep.
Well, first question. After dedicating over 40 years of your life to whiskey research, what do you love most about whiskey? What remains on your to-do list? When can we expect to read your 19th book As far as I know, his name is a history of whiskey in 100 objects, right?
Yes and no. Um, yep, I started to write about research and write about whiskey in 1981 as a commercial copywriter. And I wrote by chance a number of commercial documents, annual reports, corporate reports, promotional brochures and things um, for many whiskey companies during the 1980s. I was also writing books, historical books, on the back burner, as it were, when I wasn't doing the commercial work. And in 1988, I had sufficient credibility to make a proposal to a London publisher for a book. Originally, it was about blended Scotch whisky, and I'll come to that later. But that was in 1988. That was commissioned, and that started me on writing about whiskey. Since then, I've done nothing else. And indeed, I say to my friends that I drink for a living. You know, I also write about it. The my two areas, I was trained, I think you may have mentioned this actually,
Yeah.
but I was trained in the sensory evaluation of potable spirits in 1992. And that it changed my life altogether. And a lot of my work is to do, I mean, I'm sitting in front of, dozens of small sample bottles of whiskey, which I have to evaluate. So sensory evaluation, and but then my first degree was in history, art history actually, and so the history of Scotch and how to assess it are really they're my key areas of interest. Now, I wouldn't have been able to. It's very difficult to survive as a writer. Um, and I would not have been able to have survived had it not been for the generosity, I suppose, of the whiskey industry, various whiskey companies um, who invited me to assess their products or to write about them or whatever, and that continues. That's really my background. Now, when you say the Scotch whisky industry is a wonderful place to be, what moves me particularly, apart from these areas that I'm fascinated by flavor, by aroma and taste, and I'm also endlessly fascinated about the history of Scotch whisky. But really, what is so satisfying is the people involved, particularly on the production side. The unlike wine tasting, there are comparatively few whiskey writers, and we all share ideas. Indeed, we share publishers. If I have been in the past asked to write a book about so and so, and I said, no, I haven't got time, or I've covered that ground, don't want to do it. I will immediately pass it on to one of my colleagues, and we see each other as being colleagues. So working with people like other writers is a pleasure, but particularly dealing with so it's a very, and you see that reflects the attitude of the industry itself, because for example, you would never badmouth a competitor. Within the whiskey industry, everybody respects or the companies respect the achievements of their competitors. And in a small place like Islay, for example, where if a piece of plant breaks down, one of the other distillers, a competitor distiller, if you like, will supply the pump or the whatever it is until a replacement comes. So the industry works very closely together. In the markets, of course, they fight hard, but even in the markets, the brand ambassadors, the salespeople, respect one another, know one another. They get up to all kinds of hijinks, I tell you. But it's a wonderful industry to have been, purely by chance in my case, to be involved with. I'm so pleased, so pleased. Now, I can't remember what was your final part of your question. Can't remember.
What do you love most about whiskey? The people to share, I guess. And your next book, the 19th book, is coming?
Well, during COVID, yes, of course, I've forgotten that. During COVID, I was commissioned to write a number of books. I wrote 5 books, actually. And some of them quite small. But one was commissioned by a book packager rather than a publisher, and it has not yet been published. And frankly, I don't know whether it will be published. But it was called A History of Whiskey in 100 Objects, and I was doing it with Gavin Smith, who's another very close friend and a very good writer.
Yeah.
So it filled the days, and it was great fun researching various things. But one of the other books that I was asked to write was for an American company called the International Wine and Food Society. And this was described as a monograph. So in other words, a small book about blended Scotch. And as I mentioned earlier on, when I first started thinking about writing a book about Scotch whiskey, I knew that nothing, so we're talking 1988, nothing has been written, nothing substantial has been written about blended Scotch. And yet it is the backbone of the Scotch whiskey industry. And before malts came along and saved the day, actually, because sales of blends particularly in 1980s in particular, took a dive. And so most of my work is done actually with malt whiskey. But I've resumed that, having started. That little book was published but now I want to make a much bigger book of it, an illustrated book with all sorts of labels and bottles and histories of different blended Scotch brands, and that's what I'm working on now. So the 100 Objects has been parked, if you like. It's been set aside, and if it comes out, fine. But you've got to move on.
Anyway, I can't wait to read any of your books. It's gonna be wonderful anyway. So let's wait. So next questions. I guess you have tasted whiskeys over 50, 60 years old and older. What unique notes did you get compared to younger whiskeys aged between 15 and 21 years? I mean, what's the difference?
Age is not a guarantee of quality. So much old whiskies are so influenced by the cask. And if the cask is, the distillers talk about activity, cask activity. If a cask is very active and you leave it in for a long time, frankly, the whiskey comes out. It can be a beautiful drink, but you couldn't tell where it came from. And very often it's tannic, it's very dry. Yes, I have tasted whiskies of very old whiskies. Some of them are really, really memorable. Others are, frankly, not exactly.
Is there any favorite that you remember that you think that was a great whiskey?
Yeah, I do. but of course I can't remember which ones they were. But I'm privileged to do a lot of work with Diageo assessing their so-called casks of distinction. Now they're selling these individual casks, and they're mainly around 40 years old, and some of them are absolutely superb. Others, dare I say it, I write back and say I think this is past its sell-by date. Usually because the alcohol level has gone down, and so it's lost a lot of character.
Yeah.
Now, by contrast, some of the new operating distilleries, which are now beginning to release whiskey at 4, 5 years old. It depends again on the cask activity, you know. And some of these whiskies from very active casks at 5 years old are really excellent. They lack depth, they lack complexity, but they're splendid drinks. So I think that's the answer. That the old whiskies, there's no doubt that you find sublime flavors in old whiskies. Some old whiskies, not all. But it's the depth and complexity, and also the rarity as well. I mean, that's tasting a whiskey that's been made, you know, sort of 60 years old, 60 years ago. And that's actually another thing, because one of the things that I'm lucky enough occasionally to look at are whiskies that even if they're young, but they're made in the 1960s or even before the war, you know, and even if they're bottled at 8 years old, which was a common bottling age in the 1960s and 70s, they're fascinating. They really are, and they have. I love to do this to take, if I'm offered a whiskey from that era made in the 1960s, to compare the same whiskey at the same age with its contemporary equivalent. So you've got an 8-year-old Fettercairn, for example. You try and find they don't bottle it 8 years, but I mean a 10-year-old Fettercairn, and you can see the difference. And that is for me so interesting. And you can pick up some of these younger malts, but made and distilled in the 60s and 70s, or even in the 80s, but nothing like as much as you'd pay for old malt whiskies now at auction. Does that answer the question? I'm rambling around already. It's a bad
No,
idea.
you are doing great. You're doing great. Great, great. You did answer the question, so don't worry. But you just mentioned ABV when you were talking about the old whiskies, and that's my next question. I would like to know how significant are ABV, chill filtration, and the use of E150A to the texture, aroma, and taste of whiskey. Have you ever had the opportunity to compare the same whiskey with and without chill filtration and E150A? What conclusions did you draw?
Oh, that's a whole raft of questions there. First of all, the higher strength holds in the flavor-bearing compounds, the congeners, the molecules that distinguish one whiskey from another, indeed one whiskey from another spirit. So high strength is a good idea. Since 1915, in 1915, it was ruled that the strength of whiskey should be reduced to 40% alcohol, and that's been relaxed now. So high strength is good for holding in flavors for two reasons. But first I would say, but not necessarily for drinking at high strength. I'm a great believer in adding water to whiskey. It depends very much on the whiskey, but never ever be shy about adding water. Any tap water, as long as it's not chlorinated, as long as the water itself has no odor or taste. So that's the first thing. But so reduce the strength in the glass. Nose and taste straight. Add a wee bit of water, if you like, and then nose and taste again, and you see a difference. Bottled product, and as I say, that is at 40% alcohol, has lost a lot of its character. Now, the reason for this is these, as I mentioned, these molecules, when you add water, they become volatile, and so you can smell them, first of all. And then secondly, it makes it much easier to hold the liquid in your mouth to assess it. And so if you can do that in the glass rather than it's already been done in the bottle, it's a benefit. Now, as for coloring, it's interesting enough that in the old days they used to use Paxaret,
Yeah.
From Spain, as a colorant, and Paxaret.
Some flavor, I heard, right?
It's what?
And some flavor too, right? With that pack.
Well, yeah, and that was why it was banned in 1990. I think it was banned because it was deemed to be adding to the flavor. But I tell you what, man, the blenders loved it, and it was mainly used for blends, of course, to color. And it's intensely sweet. It's a reduction. It's a vino corto. It's a reduction of Pedro Jimenez and other sweet sherries and so on. And but it did it does even a tiny amount gives a huge color and the dark color. And it was used in a very, very small way, but the blenders loved it. It added sweetness. Although actually, when you try it well, anyway, but that was banned, and so except this colorant, as you gave the name of it, the
158, yeah.
It's spirit caramel. Now, spirit caramel is it's described as being organoleptically inert. It has no smell or taste. Now, this I've done experiments with it. This is absolutely true with whiskey. I'll come to that in a second. But if you add it to water, it's complete bullshit, because you can smell a little bit, but it tastes bitter. It's rather like you'd think that, spirit caramel, it's going to be sweet. No, it's like saccharin, it's like saccharin, the coffee pills. But in the quantities that it's used, with very few exceptions, it's really, you can't discern it. It doesn't really affect the flavor, the overall smell and taste of the whiskey. I'm against it because it spoils the idea of being able to, when you look at a sample of whiskey, look at this, it's a gorgeous color. And I know that this has not been adulterated, colored up. So I can tell that this has been largely from European oak, ex-bourbon, or probably European oak ex-sherry, I would guess. But the sherry doesn't give color. It's the oak. Whether it's European or American oak, that gives the color.
Yeah.
And if you look at a standard blended whiskey, well, that's a mix of casks, some of them being mainly American oak, but then it'll be tinted you know, it'll be tinted with very, very small amounts of while I've got it in my hand, I might just pour myself another dram. The to make it acceptable amongst, you know, amongst your group and amongst connoisseurs. Increasingly, people would prefer the whiskey to be what they call natural strength and natural color, you know. So they're not shy about, they're not put off by very pale whiskies. If you're in Asia, you know, they they think, what's the matter with this one? It's too pale, you know. So that's why they tint it, they color it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a chain. Oh, I don't think it's needed anymore. More people know about whiskey now, and I know. Honestly, it's time to let it behind.
You're absolutely right. But in your market, in the developed market, in Europe in particular, not in Asia. They like it. They like a dark whiskey in Asia.
I know. And what about chill filtering, chill filtration?
Chill filtering is a peril because again, it's done for cosmetic reasons. So the non-chill filtered whiskies, again, it's to do with the compounds. They're called long chain fatty esters in the whiskey, and when you chill it down or add ice or indeed sometimes just add water, it goes very slightly opaque, very slightly. And some consumers think, "Whoa, this is my you know, send it back, and my whiskey's gone cloudy." It's at an extreme, you know, it's at an extreme. It's like pastis, you know, but it never goes as cloudy as pastis. But a little cloudiness, you know. Now, so the way the sorry, my voice is very funny. I don't know what's the matter with it today. But in the late 70s, well, it became common practice in the late 70s. The industry was this whiskey industry was very concerned about this, and so they went to the laboratory which trained me, called the Pentland Scotch Whisky Research Institute, and said, "Look, how do we sort this out?" And they came up with the idea of chilling down the spirit before on the bottling line to around about freezing, sort of plus or minus 2 degrees, which would precipitate these long chain fatty esters, to be correct, and then squeeze the liquid through a bank of, they're like blotting paper, you know, and so they would trap them, and so it was politely called polishing, you know. So the liquid would come out the other end, beautiful, bright, and clear. And above, if you're bottling above around about 45%, and so reducing to 45%, you're not going to get haze. If you go down, then you do get haze. Do you see what I mean? But these long chain, these lipids, sometimes they're called, they are mighty contributors to particularly texture, mouthfeel effect, and the and to overall flavor. I mean, the aroma. So it's very interesting if you to look at a sample, which is one that has been reduced in the bottle and one unreduced natural strength or without chill filtration. It's chalk and cheese. It really is. So chill filtration is not a good idea. If they advertise non-chill filtered, yes, good.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Don't you think that people can learn to love haze and the whiskey flock and all that stuff?
Yes,
A
and
whiskey lover.
absolutely. It's a good. Yes, indeed. I mean, members of your society, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, etc., they're keen on that because the interesting thing you see is that what gives flavor to whiskey. Well, they call, as I said, they're called conscience, but some would call them the dirty bits, you know,
Yeah,
the and so, but that's what gives character, and you don't want to take them out, you know.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. That's perfect. Absolutely. And as you mentioned, mouth feeling is so important. Texture and
Yeah.
the aroma and all is important. Why to remove anything natural from the whiskey? It makes no sense to me.
Well, let's say it's cosmetic. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
it's as the market, as consumers become more wise to this, then they don't need to. Of course, it makes sense for the industry. Would be delighted not to have to go through this extra process of chill filtration or reduction. Well, reduction, they're reducing the strength. That's a different thing. Anyway.
awesome, awesome. The next questions comes from my Facebook group that is called Single Malt Whiskey en Español too. And this is a very common question. They ask, what advice on whiskey appreciation would you give to someone who is just starting to taste whiskey and has trouble perceiving flavor? I mean, texture, smell, and taste.
And my answer to that is to go with 3 or 4 friends, small group, to a good bar, well stocked with whiskey, ideally with a bartender who knows knows his stuff, you know, and say to him, so say there's four of you, okay, and say, right, we want 4 large glasses of different whiskies. You choose them, bartender. We want them all to be very different. They might be American whiskies, Irish whiskies. They might be different sorts of Scotch whiskies. But it has to be served in as you have there in an appropriate glass, a nosing glass, not the tumbler that I'm drinking out tonight.
The current
Yeah,
is
that's
really common and it's perfect, right?
yeah, those are perfect. And the share and share, pass it around, pass it around, pass them around, and then discuss. You know, are they well, the first stage is, are they the same? Answer no.
Yeah.
And if you're given a range, um, they won't be the same. And so then discuss and then say to the bartender, um, right, we would like to explore number 3, you know, and number 3, let's say the most obvious would be a sort of smoky whiskey. And so give us another 5 or 4 of them or whatever, how many people there, in that style, you know. And so then he would pour an Ardbeg, a Lafroig, and like a Lagavulin, but more, whatever. Um, and then, you know, explore those. Are they the same? They're subtly different, you know.
Yeah.
And then you're beginning to learn that they're not, that malt whiskies are not the same, you know. When you get to Speyside, it's more subtle, it's more difficult, but the principle is the same. And then you might go back to the bartender and say, right, can we have a look at number 5 at different ages if they've got it in the bar? You know, do you see what I mean? It's really an exploration. But what I always say is that do it in a bar because you're not going to go and buy, you know, dozens of bottles of whiskey just to explore.
Yeah.
Um, but no, and this is very important. Um, you know, malt whiskey drinkers, perhaps unlike blended Scotch drinkers, um, blended Scotch drinkers tend to be brand loyal. They like one and they stick to it, if it's available. Malt drinkers are they're explorers,
Yeah.
and they appreciate the differences, subtle differences, sometimes extreme differences in others. So that's the best way. I think the best way of doing the exploration. Yeah.
And it's so much fun, right? It's so much fun to do it with friends in a bar and exploring all that stuff. I think it's the best way.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Carry on until you fall over. Yeah. Oh, I shouldn't be saying that.
Don't worry. Don't worry. My friend, that's great. That's great. Awesome. This is the next question. We're gonna talk about New Make Spirit. So the importance of great wood management to make good whiskey is quite evident. But can you tell us what about the importance of New Make Spirit? Is it possible to produce good whiskey with great cask if the spirit is poor?
Well, the flavor in any whiskey, multiple grain, is the industry described it as the distillery character, the inherent character coming from that distillery. In grain whiskey, the differences are very, very subtle, but nevertheless. And then so distillery character and mature character, what comes from the wood. Now, the wood contributes a huge amount to rounding off and evolving and creating flavors in the spirit. The spirit, generally speaking, is pretty harsh, and the some spirit is drinkable, but it's not really. It lacks all depth and complexity. So that comes from the wood. But as I mentioned earlier on, and what the wood does, the wood has to be oak, of course,
Yeah.
and but it tends to be it's either American oak or European oak, Quercus alba, Quercus roba, and the different oak woods give different characters to the whiskey. The whiskey almost universally in Scotch is there's if you like secondhand casks, so they are the American oak tends to come from America from the ex bourbon casks. The bourbon actually plays no role. It takes out some of the activity of the cask. The European oak again often is American, but it's been seasoned with sherry. And they tend to talk about ex-bourbon and ex-sherry, which is frankly erroneous because it's the wood that makes the difference rather than the first incumbent. If you've got port pipes and things like that for finishing and so on, that can make a difference. But it's all to do with this, as I mentioned earlier, this cask activity, how active the cask is. If you want to, ideally you want a balance between mature character and the so-called distillery character, the inherent character. You don't want to these very old whiskies. It's extremely difficult to tell where they've come from. They may be beautiful drinks, but they've lost all their original character, And so the ideal is to achieve this balance of what distinguishes all the bottles behind you, what makes them all different. That's the distillery character,
Yeah.
but they've rounded off and fulfilled through maturation. So the wood plays a hugely important part, but you don't want it to take over. Now, an illustration of this would be, first of all, bourbon and rye. bourbon to be sold in the States as straight bourbon or straight rye, it has to be filled in brand new oak casks, American oak, American white oak casks. And part of the character of the flavor profile, desired flavor profile of bourbon or rye is this oaky, well, it's vanilla and coconut and woody
Yeah.
oaky note. That is what they want, and but the Scotch whisky industry doesn't want that, for one reason or another, which is too long to go into. But I mean, also in days gone by, the casks were much cheaper, second-hand
Yeah,
casks,
true. That's
but
true. Yeah.
not nowadays, I have to say. Um, but the indeed a lot of the I mean, Diageo, for example, the biggest producer of Scotch, um, when the new American oak, with, I say new, they're not, they've already been seasoned with bourbon, but they for their malt whiskey purposes, they're still too active, and so they fill them with grain whiskey, and to take out some of this activity. And I think you touched on grain whiskey, and a lot of grain whiskey grain spirit is lighter than malt spirit, and so it takes on flavors. And some of these, there is a growth in interest in grain whiskey, particularly aged grain whiskey at the moment. And but I find a lot of them really too. I mean, they're very pleasant drinks, but um, they're often for me too much flavors coming from the wood.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But do you have a favorite cask maturation? I mean, do you prefer ex bourbon? Do you prefer ex cherry? Do you have a favorite kind of oak for maturation? What's your favorite?
I think that my favorite is American oak seasoned with sherry,
Yeah.
ex sherry, and
Awesome.
because the European oak is very tannic, and it gives great color, but the American oak ex sherry, that's been my answer to that.
And do you lean to peated or peated whiskies?
No, the glorious thing is that I I I I wouldn't want to eat. I wouldn't want to drink either all the time.
Yeah, I agree.
I I
Yeah.
mean I've never invested in. I've never bought a cask of whiskey, um, and yeah. I mean, I love peaty whiskey, um, but I wouldn't want to drink it all. I couldn't drink it all the time.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the non-peated but it's a glorious natural elemental style of whiskey. And it was always, well, in days gone by, the going back a long way, but the peated style of whiskey was thought to be designed to be drunk out of doors, because
Ah,
it had an elemental. When I'm traveling, and well, not I'm not traveling quite so much now, but um, if I'm in a bar late at night in Singapore or whatever, and what I want, I want a smoky Scotch Talisker, Lagavulin, Lafroig, but more, because it takes me home,